I don't think it's possible to introduce Jim Gavin with a list of titles and positions without severely undervaluing the contributions that he's made to the field, right? But I will share one award that he was given and a title. He was given the title of Living Legend by the ADA. Yeah? Now, what do you have to do to get that title? Right, yeah, right? But how do you get that title, Jim? I'll tell you, you get it by not caring what titles people give you or what awards are being handed out. You get it by showing up every day and doing the work, all right? Whether you feel like it or not, whether they're handing out medals or not, you show up. And Dr. Jim Gavin has certainly showed up for the diabetes community. And in particular here as a mentor and guiding light for this growing and budding D network. He has made his contribution felt here. So please welcome everyone, Dr. Jim Gavin.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, David. I'm appropriately embarrassed. And all I can say is that being named the living legend certainly beats the alternative. When Gary, my colleague and mentee who escaped before I could get back at him, talked about when he was a pup, that means that I was an old dog at the time. You know? But congratulations to him. And when Kelly asked me to give a lightning talk, I was really under stress. You know, for an old Southerner like me, it takes me 5 minutes just to say hi, y'all. So let me try to do what I can on this. So this issue of food as medicine really is part of the quest for wellness and diabetes prevention. And we really need to think seriously about nutrition-led obesity avoidance. And I want to focus on the fact that the stakes are now global. And I apologize in advance for only being able to skim the surface of an enormously dynamic and complicated area of discourse, but that's the penalty of a lightning talk. There's no question, and you've already been introduced to this, that the obesity epidemic constitutes the shoulders upon which the diabetes epidemic rides. And the most direct approach to the obesity epidemic really comes by way of our caloric intake. It's a diet-induced issue coupled with sedentary lifestyle. Notwithstanding all of the genetic and environmental influences, the most direct pathway to what we know as obesity, with all of the downstream consequences, including diabetes, is from our diet. And there's little question that obesity has emerged as a chronic disease that adversely affects health in many ways. Now, we have celebrated the issue of type 2 diabetes, but we don't need to stop there. We just don't have time to detail all of these other conditions, including increased mortality and the fact that it is much more difficult to treat many of these other chronic diseases in the presence of obesity. Now, the fact is that there are a few well-documented findings that support the critical need for food as medicine. If you think about the fact that if diet and the way we eat and what we eat constitutes the drivers of the obesity epidemic, then it stands to reason that the way back from there involves using food as a tool, as a strategy, as medicine to walk us back from the crisis that we are in. So a few findings that really lend support to this, one of which is that nearly half of the deaths from heart disease, stroke, and type 2 diabetes each year are attributed to eating too much sodium, processed meat, sugary beverages, and unprocessed red meat, but too few fruits, nuts, seeds, seafood omega-3s, and so forth. A Mediterranean-style diet has been shown to cut heart attacks and deaths by 70%, associated with a risk of decreased strokes, dementia, and Alzheimer's. That becomes a lot more interesting to me as I stay a living legend. The Dpp diet. Now, most of us are familiar with this. Was a diet that didn't have a name, but yet was one of those powerful interventions that we've had in diabetes prevention. It was characterized by lower calories, less saturated fat, less simple sugars, combined with moderate physical activity, reduced the risk of progression from IGT to type 2 diabetes by almost 60%. And then emerging data showed that unprocessed food diets are associated with greater caloric intake and weight gain versus the ingestion of unprocessed, ultra-processed food versus unprocessed food. Now, this relationship is well known to all of us. In your adult years, the amount of weight that you gain as an adult, and these data come from people where the weight gain pattern was followed from the time of their age 21 up through ages 40 through 75. What you see is there is a direct and powerful relationship between the amount of weight that you gain and the risk that you have for developing diabetes. And we've tried to reduce this to simplistic formulations. The energy equation, that if we can somehow or another affect one of these two buckets, energy in versus energy out, as if we had the prerogative to manipulate one versus the other. Maybe if we just burn up more energy, we could sort of restore balance and get back to a more normative body weight. Well, it's not that simple at all. In fact, what we know is this. If you look at the most important issue with respect to defeating obesity, it's not only to lose the weight, but to maintain the weight that's lost. Almost every other person in this room is familiar with how hard it is to lose weight. But the fact of the matter is, it's even harder to maintain weight that's lost. 20% or so of people who are successful in losing weight only 20% or so are successful in maintaining the weight that is lost. And the fact of the matter is, you cannot, by manipulation of the energy output side of that equation, exercise your way into or out of the obesity epidemic. We simply physiologically cannot do it. It's a far more complicated calculus than that. And in fact, I'm sorry to Scott, you know, this is the nature of the map that really defines what we are dealing with complication. I much rather have Scott's maps, okay? But the fact of the matter is we see what the complexities are, that there are numerous areas where we have to have important touch points if we are going to address the complexity that is involved in the generation and maintenance of obesity. This is a complex problem. Now, I had a moment of epiphany that was relevant to this discussion not long ago when I was in Oklahoma. I was in Northeast Oklahoma. I spent some time in Oklahoma as a professor, but I had not spent much time in Northeast Oklahoma, and it was a beautiful area. I mean, pastoral beauty, big, wide open pastoral fields filled with animals. And while we were driving along, passing area after area, the driver commented, there are more cows in Oklahoma than there are people. And this was a jarring statement to me. It was a jarring reality because it dawned upon me that we were immersed in a culture whose dietary centerpiece is beef. Whose economic engine, certainly for that portion of Oklahoma, is fueled by beef, whose highest levels of feast and celebration are anchored in beef. In fact, where do we go to celebrate? Where did the glitterati go? Where do you go to celebrate important milestones? Delmonico's, Del Frisco's, Morton's, Ruth's, Lowry's, and so many others. In fact, a compelling case is required if we're going to effect changes in culture. And that's underscored by the presence of economic incentives. Those people are not about to give up their cows easily because it's the economic engine of that region of the world. And it's how they enjoy themselves. It is a common theme of the festival. Let's eat some cows. And now, while that's a local set of issues that I was reflecting on, it dawned on me that, you know what, we've gotten to a point where there are global implications here because this dynamic, in terms of its health and medical implications, has now gone global. In parts of the world where obesity and type 2 diabetes have not long been a major problem, we are beginning to see the emergence of these same dynamics. In Japan, what we see are data like these, and they've continued to rise, that the increase in the obesity prevalence that's been the shoulders on which the increased prevalence of type 2 diabetes has arisen. So now we are in the midst of a different narrative. We are now confronted with the need to think about syndemics. What in the world? Well, syndemics represent a situation where two or more diseases interact in time and place, but negatively affect each other and have common economic, societal, or environmental drivers, like intravenous drug use, shared needles with HIV and hepatitis C infections, chronic obesity, and type 2 diabetes. The global syndemic that we are now faced with means that the interactions of pandemics of obesity and undernutrition, these two don't sound like they should coexist, but they do. We have got a whole new science of the developmental origins of health and disease, which predict that exposure to undernutrition, in utero famine, for example, predicts that many of those same children will end up as adults with obesity. Climate change, a major driver in changing food production patterns. These diseases affect each other. Climate change must be considered as a pandemic. This is driven by food policies. We are doing clearing and we're burning and we're generating hot, what do you call it? Hothouse gas, what do you call them? You know, greenhouse gases. Yeah, and we're changing urban design so that we're seeing more emissions that contribute to greenhouse gases and poor land use systems. And these now have to be population rather than individually focused. So examples of syndemic interactions that have relevance to what we are concerned about. We are seeing obesity and stunting of children in the same populations. These are issues related to quality and quantity imbalances, disparities. We are seeing low birth weight and adult obesity driven by the same kinds of disparities. In utero exposure to malnutrition and undernutrition, poor food policies resulting in both extremes being expressed. More car use, more inactivity, more greenhouse gas emissions, CO2, carbon dioxide, NO, nitric oxide, and for those of you who are chemically challenged, CH4, methane. All of those cows and hooved animals create a whole lot of methane. We know it by other means, by other terms, but these are the things that affect the environment in which we have to now develop sustainable food sources. And it's no longer simply a local or provincial concern. We have to find ways to manage agricultural production and food nutrients, especially in marginal areas where we've developed processes that depend on food supplies that are harmful to the environment. And the harm that's being done to the environment impairs our ability to develop sustainable production of foods to match the needs of a growing global population. And this is a huge and growing issue. It requires actions from all from all actors. We have to think in global syndemic terms and understand the common causes and seek common solution. We have to create win-wins. What is the approach that we're going to use to ranchers in Oklahoma and Texas? What are we going to say to people who are challenged to do crop rotations that may not be as profitable for them? How can we create a win-win for sustainable food production and changes that would lead to healthier eating patterns? We need to create collaborative platforms across the existing silos to implement double and triple duty solutions. There is an urgency for us to adopt an all of us mindset. Individual decisions about eating behaviors now must be considered as having an impact on basically the health of the planet. Just think about that. It's a new way of thinking about what we're doing as individuals and how that affects sustainability of our planet. Strategies that are necessary. We need to invest in infrastructure for public and physically active transport so we can reduce emissions, build urban food systems for resilience. What can we do to reduce the load of certain fertilizers, the load, the burden of land clearing for agricultural purposes? We are overfishing all of our oceans. We have to generate environmental sustainability. And we need to join international networks of cities to share resources and innovative strategies. What is demonstrated to be successful in one area, we have to model that and replicate and scale those programs. And then we need to nurture community coalitions to foster grassroots change and advocate for supportive solutions. So this is basically simply a representation of a triple duty action strategy that might be required here. And this simply points to reduce red meat consumption. You heard Nancy Kane talk about last night. The creation of the win-win is not going to be to try to jump on people to get them to stop eating meat. They're not going to stop eating meat if they've been eating meat and that's now embedded in their culture. But they may very well be persuaded to eat less meat if they can get buy-in into the nation. There's a notion that this is the solution that's going to benefit all of us. Healthier diets, not just for obesity, but for other non-communicable diseases. Better policies for land use and generation of sustainable agriculture. Climate change is important and it affects our ability to develop sustainable, healthy food supplies. Lowering of greenhouse gases, lowering of emissions from agriculture, absolutely important. So this is a new narrative that we are engaged in. There is an urgency to adopt the mantra of food as a medicine. We really have to engage this. The path to successful prevention of diet-related chronic diseases, like we've been talking about, requires strategies or strategic use of food as real medicine. And there is an increasing global urgency for food as medicine due to all of these interrelationships, things that we are just now beginning to understand more clearly. Our challenge will be to align competing interests and create a sustainable framework for the greater good. The question to all of us, can we create the required win-win to really make this happen? Thank you.